Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm Sophie, joining you from the University of Melbourne, the Asia Education Foundation, and it's fabulous to have you join us for this Exploring Our World using Google Earth check-in session. I'm pleased to have my colleagues with me today. I've got Kristen up there on the top of my screen. Hi, Kristen.
Hi, everybody. Pleasure to meet you.
And Junior joining us from AAPNG in Port Moresby. Hi, Junior.
Hi, Sophie and everybody else.
And then last but not least at all, John Bailey joining us all the way from Hawaii. Hi, John.
Hey, everyone.
Great to have you with us again. And as I said, it is a check-in session, so it's a little bit different to previous sessions. Before going further, I'd just like to acknowledge all the traditional custodians of the lands on which we work, live and learn, and recognise their continuing connection to land, water and community. I'd particularly like to acknowledge the Bunurong people, the traditional custodians of the land on which I live and meet with you today. I'd also like to pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. So as I said, this is a check-in session. This is an opportunity for people who are undertaking the Exploring Our World project as launched by John and the Asia Education Foundation a couple of weeks ago to check in and ask questions. No question is a silly question, and we've got John here to respond. He's our resident expert in Google Earth, and he's here to help you progress your projects. You may recall that we're hoping your Google Earth projects will be ready for submission early next week with a view to showcasing them on Wednesday, the 30th of March. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to John, who, as I said, is here to support you and respond to your questions and tease out any issues you may be having.
Okay, thank you, Sophie. So as Sophie mentioned, this is a check-in session. In fact, our original plan here was I just suggested that because the Google Earth projects is possibly a very sort of new concept and thing to many of you, that I would be available online at a set time for people that might be having issues or had questions. And we decided to make it a little more sort of organized and formal than that. But in terms of it being a presentation session, I got nothing for you. I don't have anything prepared. But that's not to say I'm not happy to show you stuff. So, you know, the focus here is on the project's work, but really any questions around Google Earth are fair game. The way I'm going to do this, I'm going to make sure I can see the chat available. We've got, you know, the folks from past to sort of keep tabs on if people are trying to raise their hands or if there's questions appearing there. So I'm just, you know, happy to open it up. If people want me to recap things that we went over in the last two sessions, I'm happy to do that. If you have very specific questions, I'm happy to rabbit hole into those. I guess the one thing I will say is if it's really specific to you, and if it's things you don't particularly want other people overhearing, bear in mind, everyone can hear what you're saying. So, you know, maybe that's a conversation we need to take to email or something. But beyond that, you know, let me know what you want to know about. Even if you just want to like pitch your idea of what you're working on and want input from even myself or the other people of like things you could do around that topic, feel free to throw it out there. We'd love to know what you're working on.
Okay, sorry, John, just one question here.
Yes.
When using the Google Earth application, how can we delete if we make mistakes?
Good question.
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. The simple answer is the great thing about Google Earth projects is everything can be easily redone. It's a little hard to undo, as in there's not kind of a back button that will just undo the last thing you did. But unless you're creating some very complicated line or polygon, and I will explain in a minute about how you can edit those, it's you know, the easiest way to correct a mistake is just to delete the thing you made and make a new one. So I will show you some examples of that, as in if it lets me.
Just delete and then.
All right, come on, please work. All right, there we go, finally.
Oh, well done, John.
Okay. All right. So here we are in Google Earth. And when we talk about mistakes, we're talking specifically about when we make things in Google Earth projects. Because honestly, there's no mistake anywhere else. You might fly to the wrong place, but you know what? That just means you're exploring a different part of the world. And that's great. You know, find somewhere new, even if it wasn't where you meant to go to. So when we say errors or mistakes, we're talking about here in Google Earth projects, which is the focus of what we spoke about in the last session and what the tool that we're using to create things. So I'm just going to do a little bit of housekeeping here to make this simple. All right, so here we are in projects. And I'm going to start by creating a new project in Google Drive. So when we open up a new project like this, there's nothing in it because I haven't created anything. In fact, even the name up here says Untitled Project. It's very generic. It's just like when you make a new document on Google Drive or a new slideshow, it's like Untitled Slides or Untitled Doc. So the first thing we might want to do is go up to the top here, and we see there's a little pencil icon, and we click on that. That now allows us to edit the title. So when I do that and I hit the back arrow, it now has that title. Now I've gone out of the project, but to go back in and re-edit the project, again, there's a little pencil icon. And once again, I can click on this and I can give my project a different name. And I can keep editing it as long as I want. So there's no real need for an undo there because it's, you know, I can just edit it. Likewise, if I now start creating features in here, and I'm going to start with the simplest thing, I'm just going to add a place mark, and I'm going to click here, add a place mark, and I'm just going to drop that marker somewhere on the globe. There we go. Just going to add it generically somewhere in the PNG Highlands. I think I landed. So let's give it a name. So I've named that already. I could change the icon and the color and things at this point. All that stuff that we talked about before. I could write a description in here. This is just a little rich text box. You can almost think like this as like a mini version of Google Docs or Word, whatever your word processing application you uses, because I can bold and italicize and even link or mess with the paragraphs in here. The point being, the way I edit in here is how I would edit in a word processor. I can just delete, type, change formats by clicking the different buttons. All right, so let's back out of here. So now we've got this marker listed in here. And now let's make a new feature. Okay. And that's listed. But say I decided I wanted to change the title on my first marker. I wanted to undo the title, if you will, correct maybe a spelling mistake in there. Well, all I can do is click on the pencil again and go back and edit it, and also edit all the other things. So hopefully you're getting the idea here. It's really not about undoing things, but you can edit everything that you've done. Now, if you have placed it in the wrong location, there is a way of adjusting that location. It's down here under the advanced options. And when you go under advanced options, it shows you the longitude and latitude where you've put that marker. So I could actually, if I wanted, manually edit. See, the marker vanished? It didn't actually vanish. It moved all the way over here because I manually edited the value of its coordinates. So I've moved it back now. But you know what? If you put it in the wrong location, honestly, unless you've done a lot of work in here, it's probably just easier to delete that marker, which I'll show you to do in a minute, and add a new one. And even if you have added a lot of things in here, it probably still is easier to just take what you've done in here, like say you've written a lot of text, copy it into a doc, and then paste it into your new marker. In fact, if you remember from our project session, we talked about how you want to write and gather all your information in a Google Doc before you bring it in here anyway. So really, you should have all that information already. And maybe all that you lose by deleting this marker is some of the customization of the icon that you've done. So what I would do if I wanted to replace that marker, quite honestly, is I would go here to where these three dots are, click on them, and it opens up a delete option, and I can just make it go away. And the same thing is true for the other types of features you have here. The one kind of exception, and this is the thing that I wanted to show you, and let me just, sorry, go back, turn off this project so that I can do this. So say we wanted to draw a line that matches this sort of, I think this is some sort of state or area border. And we decided that rather than relying on having this feature turned on in Google Earth, which is what we see here, that I actually wanted to create my own line. And I could go in here and maybe, you know, I'm in a hurry or it's just kind of hard to do. I create this line and it doesn't quite match up. I can edit the points, the vertices of this line. Now I can't add any new vertices to the end, but say I wanted to, say I wanted to change a vertex or edit a vertex, I can click on it and I can drag it to a new location. And in fact, when I click on a big vertex like that, there's middle ones that created. Now see how I moved that middle one? Now that's a big one and new middle ones created. So see what I'm doing here? I'm actually making this line fit to the white line. If I want to extend this, I can't add new vertices onto the end here. But what I can do is drag this last one down here. And now I've got a middle, and now I've created two new middles. And so I can go through this sort of iterative process of refining the line, or this works for polygons too, that I've created. I would say that that's much better to do rather than deleting the line and starting again. But if we're just talking about place marks, we're talking about slides, folders. Obviously, if you've got stuff in the folder, drag it out if you don't want to delete it as well. But just delete those and make new ones. Lines and shapes, you can edit them. The info boxes and the sort of information around all these features, you click on the pencil and you go into edit mode. Hopefully that answers your question, Cedric. All right.
Yes, thank you, John.
Okay, great. Anyone else? Questions? Things you want to learn about? Things you want to share with us? Things that you want me to recap from the previous sessions because you missed them, I went too quickly, or maybe it didn't quite make sense to you?
Against any questions there, girls?
Oh, while you're thinking, I'll maybe go back and re-show that an example of a Google Earth project that I've created, and maybe I'll even just click through the whole thing this time. Before I do that, I want to go here. By the way, you see that I managed to open that, but I didn't seem to move the mouse and click on the side. That's because there's a lot of shortcuts to opening stuff and navigating in Google Earth, and I really like to use them, shortcuts using the keyboard. So for example, here, I just hit the N button on my keyboard and it opened up my map style, which is really good because I like to work with a clean globe, none of the names or borders on there. At the same time, especially when presenting, it's often necessary to have things like country names and borders. So by hitting the N button, I can very quickly open the side there and flick between those different options. You'll find that there are lots of other shortcuts, and if you look at the Google Earth user manual we created, you'll see all of that stuff listed in there. But let's go back to projects. All right, let's go back here, and if you remember, the blue button here is how I add new features to this, but the black and blue button here is how I go to present mode. So it creates this non-editing view, which is much cleaner to see, and is how we like to present these projects. And there's different ways of navigating through this project. We can open up the menu here and just jump to different places. But if we've created a story or a tour that requires to go through the features in the order that we've made them in the project, then we want to use these little chevrons here. So I'll give you an overview of my thought process of how I was using this to tell a story of the Kokoda track campaign. And I'm going to do this, but I'll say once again, feel free to raise a hand or type in the text if you have questions about this or about other things. We're happy for you to interrupt because that's what we're here for. But in the meantime, maybe this will give you some ideas. So if I'm creating a story, a narrative with Google Earth projects, the first feature I like to make is a slide. Think of this as a title slide, like you would do if you were making a presentation slideshow. What's nice about this is it allows me to create a graphic and some text that gives context to what my story is about. Also bear in mind that I generally make a project thinking someone is going to be viewing it themselves on a computer screen. If I'm making it for presentation, say in front of a classroom, I would, for example, do this title slide a little different. I wouldn't include all of this text because that would be very hard for students to read. I would probably at most maybe have just one sentence there that really just is a prompt for me as the presenter to remind me what to say in my opening remarks. Okay, so we've got our opening scene setting title slide. In this case, I found an old map, that sort of old military map showing what happened in the Kokoda track campaign. And my text there gave a little overview of it. So we start with, in the first point, discussion or information on the Japanese landing. So I've included one picture here. I always like to include pictures and videos where possible. So I tend to choose the sidebar style for the what we call the info box. So that means we have photos and videos, we have a title. I've done a subheading here because my story has a certain chronology to about it, as in there's different dates that relate to different events. So it's meaningful for me to put these dates in there. And then I have the information about the Japanese troops landing on the north coast of Papua New Guinea. Now, they landed at 3 different locations near 3 different villages. So rather than just trying to sort of show that with a bunch of dots or even like a big polygon, I've placed, if you like, a generic marker in the middle of where these villages are. Which is why when we move to step 2, I haven't made an effort to sort of draw a line and connect these together in any way. It wouldn't make sense because the Japanese troops were coming from multiple directions. But I have included this point because it's notable, because it's the first time that the Japanese came across Australian and PNG forces. So this is an important point in my story. It's kind of setting the scene of what's to come. And again, I included the date because it was on a specific date. Now we get to some more in-depth stuff, but more importantly, we get to a place where I'm making specific choices about what I'm showing and not showing. So for example, the battle at Kokoda was significant, but really the most significant thing about me showing the location of Kokoda is the name, because this, you know, is the settlement that gives the name to the track. So obviously we want to show that. And now we picked up a line because we're tracing the route of that track. And again, photo information. So a quick word on my photos. I found these online. So I was just doing a Google search and trying to find old images from the events. Now, some of them were taken on these specific dates that I mentioned. Some of them weren't. But generally, I'll explain that. But most importantly, down the bottom here, I'm giving credit to where I got the photos from. Always good or required that you cite your sources and credit your sources. All right, so the first part of our story here is about, you know, the Japanese marching forward and really about the retreat of the Australian forces, because they were outnumbered and they had to just keep falling back, along with their Papua New Guinea support troops as well. But you'll notice what I've done here is, rather than just setting this as a view where we're looking down on a marker, I very deliberately set this at an angle. And if you remember, that's something that we can do for all features by moving to a new viewpoint and clicking that blue set this view button. And what's great about this is it kind of shows the terrain and the switchback of the path. And basically, you know, how difficult it must have been for these already worn out troops retreating along the path. Okay. I've just seen the comment made about some folks that are just joining us for the first time and don't really understand what we're doing here. So I will back up and give you a little more context, and then I will finish what I'm talking about here. And then if people don't have questions, I can back up to a wider overview. As Sophie's pointed out, we do, if you go to the web page, have the first 2 sessions recorded. So there's a way for you to catch up with everything that was said. In the first session, we were giving an overview of Google Earth, and we were showing you how to navigate around Google Earth. In the second session, we were focusing on this feature that you find in the sort of 5th icon down here, the projects. So projects are a way for you to create your own content in Google Earth. And I'll talk a little more about that after I've kind of shown and finished showing my example of the project here. So the example that I created for you all relates to the Kokoda Track campaign, an important event for both Australia and PNG. And I've made an example project. And when you go into my student workbook that takes you through step by step of how to make these types of projects, this is the example I use. So I give you the instructions of how to recreate everything I'm showing you here, step by step. And the idea is that you can then use that as a way of learning the different things you can do in order to make your own project. Now that project might be about your school, your town, or something completely different. All right, let's go back to look at this project again, and we're going to jump ahead to where we were. Oh, actually, we were 1 step ahead. And I was saying how I'm making use of that default viewpoint to really give a sense of the difficulty of the terrain that all the soldiers were dealing with from both sides, both the Australian PNG and the Japanese side. So my next marker sort of is more of that story. Now, what you'll notice is I jumped over some points there. So stop 6 in my story is a folder, and that folder contains these 4 place marks because I didn't want to create, I didn't want to get into kind of sort of the minutia, as we might call it, like the real small details of this story. But I did want to show that there are some important points along the way in the story. So I refer to these points in my text that I've attached to that folder, but all of them are effectively one stop in my story. And I did that by using folders. So now we're going to move on. And now again, we're using this viewpoint to show where the Japanese advanced to. And I very deliberately now, I'm looking further down the track. But in the stop after this, I'm turning around 180 degrees and showing where the final Australian stand was. So what I'm trying to do there is show, furthest Japanese advancement, their view of where the Australians were, Australian final stand, their view of where the Japanese were. So it, again, gives you some perspective of what was going on here. Remember, we've got this wonderful 3D landscape in Google Earth. And in a place like PNG, we've got some incredible, mountains and things. So if you're creating your story in that environment, make use of it. And then my next stop is sort of beyond that. And this now is really telling the story of, it's telling the end of the story. And I'm using another feature here. I'm using the Street View imagery as my default viewpoint. And I found a Street View image which shows the start point for when people are hiking the Kokoda Trail. So I'm kind of linking back now between history and the Kokoda Track, because this is where the Australians then had to go march back up the track as they were chasing after the now retreating Japanese troops. And it's also sort of Kokoda Track or trail in the now, because this is where people like to hike this pathway, and this is where they begin. And then I kind of wrap up my story by taking a viewpoint in both the satellite imagery and the imagery on the side of the cemetery in Port Moresby, talking about the number of casualties involved here. And then finally, if I click to this last point, it goes to an overall view of the pathway I created, because that last feature is the Kokoda track, with which I drawn out using the path tool. But here's an interesting way we can approach this. If I go back here into my edit mode and I go down and I roll over that last feature and select the thing that I called the creepy eyeball and click on it, sort of the eyeball with the line through will appear, and you'll notice that the lines disappeared. Now, I haven't deleted the line. If I click it again, it reappears. What I've done is I've made it invisible. And if I go into present mode now, it's no longer there. There isn't an 11th feature. If we go and we look, it's vanished, which is great if I don't want to have that line there. But what if I wanted to have the line there, only I didn't want it to be the last stop on the tour? So I want the benefits of the line, but I want to end at the cemetery. Well, the way we can do that, if I make it visible again, is I'm going to drag it up here into that folder. Now, this is great because now when I go into present mode, 10 features, let's skip forwards. The line is there, but it's no longer my last stop. The cemetery is the last stop. I've sort of hidden it, but not hidden it, if you will, in that folder, as in it's just like those yellow place marks. It just appears that it isn't a stop along the way. So thinking about the design of your project like this, you can do some little tricks that can be helpful. All right, so I'm going to take a little break there and see if there's any questions that has inspired in people, or thoughts or ideas, or maybe is there someone willing enough or brave enough to share with us a project idea that they have?
John, I got a question.
Sure.
Maybe comment. Something that I found challenging when I want to update each of the schools' profile. I was Googling to find out the distance between the nearest airport to where the school is located and the trek along, and if I can find maybe a police station or a health center along the trek to the school. You know, those are the features that I was looking for while working on the school profile. So I think that is another good project that, you know, students could think about doing, like a map from the nearest airport or from the town to the school, how many minutes or hours it takes from the town to the school, and probably track, you know, and the important features like a police station or a good shop within the town can be featured, or a health center, you know. So that could be a very interesting one to, you know, do a project with.
Okay, yeah, no, that's fantastic. Thank you, Junior. And that's great because I can actually show you some stuff that sort of might help with that. So let me just, go back here and turn this off for now. All right. So a couple of comments that relate to that. The first actually goes back to that little trick that I was showing you a minute ago about changing the map style. So right now I just hit the M key. I could have also clicked this second to bottom icon, and it's opened up map style. And there's different map styles that we have available. What map style is really referring to is the type of information that appears on the imagery. Now, if I was to click, for example, exploration, I'm going to get certain things that appear. Place names, borders. If I zoom in close enough, well, maybe not in lay. Yeah, well, this might not show up there, but certainly I know it will for Port Moresby. If we zoom in, we should get some roads appearing, I hope. Well, maybe they don't map them out there. But there we go. If I move to everything, now we've got some roads appearing. Okay, so this is everything. And the further you zoom in, you're going to get more detail. But one thing that might be really useful is custom. Now here, rather than having all that clutter, we can decide what type of places, for example, that we want to turn on. So if we're doing, as you suggest, Junior, you know, that we need to know about certain types of businesses or certain types of places, or maybe we just want to know where the schools are. We can select schools and it should show us where schools are. Now, here's the interesting thing, and the reason that your project is actually a good suggestion. For countries and locations like PNG, Google doesn't always have a whole lot of information like that, which I think is what you're alluding to. So, but you all know where the schools are. And I think, or I hope that you're familiar enough with your town that you would be able to zoom in and go, okay, all right, I know what these red buildings are. So I know how to navigate from here to the stadium if I was on the ground. And I know that, you know, for example, I don't know if, you know, this is the case, but the building opposite the stadium is a police station. So you could then start to build these features up using projects with Jota Markham, where we happen to know the police station or the school or the church or something is. And then the second part of that was, well, we want to measure the distance between things. So we have a tool for that as well. And again, there's a shortcut to this. It also involves the M button, M for mother. But instead of just hitting M, we've got to hold down the shift key at the same time. Or we can click the bottom icon here. This is the measuring tool. So the measuring tool that comes up now allows us to click and measure the distance between places. And we can keep clicking and adding points like this. So even if our route is not a straight line, we can find the distance. And when we've found the distance and we're done, what's kind of useful is if we click the copy button, that value is put on our clipboard. Now, if doing it in meters doesn't make a whole lot of sense, if we've gone that far, we can go here and we can change it to kilometers. Or if we really must, we can change it to miles. Or we can change it to a whole bunch of different things right there. So there are some useful tools in here to do what you were suggesting, Junior, which is build a project that allows us to sort of identify the location of places and maybe give information about how far those places are and things like that.
I'm just wondering, John, before we do that, if it's worth briefly going over the Google Classroom and where to submit.
Oh, yes. Thank you for raising that. I meant to mention that. And that is a very good point. So we actually haven't, or I haven't, posted the assignment on Google Classroom yet. So that's on me, and that will happen in the next day. But where you will find it on Google Classroom is, first of all, it will appear in the stream like other assignments do. And for those of you who are set up for this, you'll get an email that there's new content added. But more importantly, it will be here under the classwork tab. and under exploring our world, and you can see I have it right there right now in draft mode. I just haven't finalized some details with Sophie and others so that I can post it. But you can see exactly where it's going to be. It's going to be under exploring our world, fourth thing down. It will be an assignment, and that will give you instructions. It will go into Classroom as an assignment. So you'll receive it as such, and you'll be able to respond to that to give us a link to your project. And if you remember, we're asking for two things for this assignment. Well, obviously, we're asking you to create a Google Earth project. And just a reminder on that, when you've created a project, let's say this one was complete, you need to go up here to this little person head icon with the plus sign and share the project. And this should look familiar if you ever use Google Drive. And then what you're going to need to do is change this so that anyone with the link can view it. You don't need to make us editors, just view. Copy that link, and that's the link you're going to share with us in Classroom. But you're going to share it on a Google Doc, because the other thing that we want from you is on that Google Doc, a title, tell us who is creating this, like what school, maybe even what students are involved, and teachers. And then we would like just a short paragraph. Like it doesn't need to be too much, you know, maybe at most 5-6 sentences, even less if you can explain it well enough. But just a short, a little paragraph telling us what your project is about, so that we understand what it is that we're supposed to be seeing. So that's it, like the title and name, school name, project title, project paragraph, and the link to the project will all go in a Google Doc, which is all going to get submitted through Google Classroom, where it will appear as an assignment very soon. Okay. Does that just about cover it, Sophie?
Yeah, I think so, John. Thank you. And is it right to say that you're going to keep an eye on the Classroom should anyone have queries between now and next week?
Yes, absolutely. That is the best play. You know, number one, if you've got questions, just respond to one of those Classroom posts. In fact, respond to when I post about the assignment. Is probably the best way. If you have maybe some deeper issues, you know, maybe problems with Classroom, or you don't want to post something on Classroom that people can see, then please reach out to the PASS team, and they can connect you directly with me on email, and we'll take care of it that way. Well, I'm actually doing a little bit of traveling in the next week, but if we've really got some problems, you know, I'm even opening to jumping on a Google Meet and showing you in live time if we're really struggling. But let's start with the process of posting in Classroom, or if you prefer not, reach out to the PASS team, and we'll try and take care of you via that communication, and we'll go from there.
And no question's a silly question, John.
No question's a silly question.
And in terms of your projects, you know, it doesn't have to have too many stops, does it, John, or pinpoints?
No, absolutely. Definitely, this is quality over quantity. You know, it might be that the project you want to create does involve making a whole bunch of place marks, but they don't involve much information. And if that's the case, then fine. But if you're trying to tell a story, then really, you know, you saw in mine there were 10 stops. That's really the absolute max you want to go to. Really, a story is best told in between 5 and 7 stops. And if you want evidence of this, then go look at the Voyager feature, the Google content that was in there that we talked about last time. If you remember, it's the third icon down, the little ship's wheel. Go in there and try looking through some of their stories. And with some exceptions, for example, the Saroo Briley, the lost Indian boy who grew up in Australia and found his way back to Australia, to India, except for stories like that, which have so much content they need a lot of stops, most of the Voyager content you will find that tell stories are 5 to 7 stops.
Yeah. So we can see a lot of students out there, and we're thrilled to have your participation and interest today. It's great to see all your faces, and we just very much hope that you can do your best to undertake this project. We know you've got a lot on and life's busy, but if you've got space, we'd really encourage you to explore using Google Earth and do your best, and we'd be really interested to receive your projects, as John said, either via the Past Classroom or directly to the admin team, and I've provided the details in the chat there.
Yeah.
And
And
Junior and I'll be sending out reminders around that early next week.
And I guess I say, you know, if you're feeling a little overwhelmed with this, you can't think of a theme or a story, you know, just take us on a tour of your campus. All of the schools on here now, if you go, and maybe I'll share real quickly just as an example of this. All of the schools on here, you will find that you have Street View imagery available for your campus now. So you see what I'll show you in a second. So down in the bottom right here, we have our little friend Pegman, who I clicked on, and he turned yellow. And when I did that, you'll see that there's some blue areas appeared in places around Papua New Guinea. And so, well, since I spotted it first, let's just go in here. Well, actually, it might be just quicker. Oh, so Mount Hagen has a whole bunch of images downtown, but now if we go into the school campus, you'll see that there's some blue dots. So this is a project that I've sort of been doing over the last few months for PASS, taking imagery that maybe some of your teachers that are on this call collected over the last couple of years, and they are now in Street View. So this was a really fun project for me because I got to visit all of your campuses through this imagery and through the satellite images in Google Earth. But here's the deal. I haven't visited any of your campuses in real life. So I had to figure out where all these images existed using the satellite images. So I maybe know some of your campuses better than you do at this point because I've spent a lot of hours touring around them. But I don't know what different buildings do. I don't know the important places on campus. So if you can't think of anything else, please tell us a story about that. I'd really love to know. So that's it for me. Thanks for joining us. I'll just hand it back to Sophie to finish up here.
Yeah, thank you, John, for another valuable session. And I hope others will agree. It was good just to stop for a moment and check in and recap the information you've shared regarding the use of Google Earth and the project's application. So just to reiterate, we're hoping that you'll be able to submit your projects by Tuesday, the 29th of March, with a view to us creating some sort of showcasing of those for the final Exploring Our World session on Wednesday, the 30th of March. So we've got one more formal session with John on Wednesday, the 30th. And in order to best prepare for that, we're hoping you can submit your projects the day before. We're really interested in what you might put together. And once again, thank you for your time this afternoon when you're all so busy. Thanks, everyone.